On today's episode of Project Pundits Unplugged, the boys discuss fine furniture.
Oh wait, I was thinking Herman Munster, Herman Miller
well,
chair.
Herman Munster would
sorry.
also fit in this chair, which is why I got it. But
Jim plans his fire escape route.
I'm stuck. Like if I had to get up in the middle of this podcast, these wheels are embedded through the plastic into the carpet. I can't
Folks,
move.
if you hear a fire alarm, could you call 911 for Jim? Because he's just going to burn
That's
in
it.
place.
I'm going to have to flip the desk to get out of here.
And Jim and Braden do Jerry and George.
Was it over the side? It was over the side.
It was like a fat person sitting in the middle seat bleeding over the armrest into my area. Like, it's terrible. It was terrible.
And we went on this way for at least 10 minutes, at which point I said, Jim, this is George and Jerry. I'm egging you on with sort of prodding questions to say, so, he wasn't just resting against, he was over. He was over!
Boy, all right, well, Braden and I were just going back and forth. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Project Pundits Pod. We've released a couple of episodes at this point. This is our third one, and we went back and forth on where to go with the topics. And we're certainly aware of trying to not go down the too drive a topic path. So when we talked about it, we settled on a topic of PMOs, primarily because it's a topic that a lot of people deal with. There's a lot of passion around them. There's a lot of investment. There's a lot of lost investment on PMOs. PMO has become a four-letter word in a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations associate PMOs with administrative overhead, loss, slowing down of projects, things like that. But I think both Braden and I see a value in them if they're done right, implemented right.
In some cases, aren't PMOs? Don't you have a story of a PMO that was literally a four-letter word? Didn't they turn it into the?
That's right. And
FPMO?
so this gets to the title of the show. This it wasn't just a funny quip, or something to drive traffic. We'll get into it when we get into the different types of PMOs, but one of the organizations that I happen to work for started what they called a federated PMO, which, I have my opinions on, but it's not an unreasonable approach to, how to roll out these functions, a federated model.
And I would say, based on my experience, it's common, right? Yeah. You see it in lots of organizations where they essentially don't have a centralized project management office.
But we'll get into that, and so from the title standpoint, the unfortunate, and we're going to get into the importance of marketing a PMO and its functions, as well as being
internal marketing, yeah,
right, and so for whatever reason, the folks in charge of this PMO decided to launch it at a company meeting and call it the FPMO. And let's just say there was already some experience within the organization with PMOs and things like that. So that quickly, I mean, as soon as it flashed on a screen, it became the effing PMO. And so in every meeting, it's like, did you get that done for the effing PMO? And so, yeah, lessons. I'm not sure I needed to learn that lesson, but if you did need to learn it, that person learned it pretty quick. So,
did they ever rename while you were there? Did they rename the organization in some way? Did they have to rebrand it?
They renamed it and laid everybody off and got rid of it.
There you go.
Yep.
Oh boy.
And so, yeah, we're going to get into the different models, what makes PMO successful, why they fail. There's some quick lessons learned that both of us have that we want to share. I think PMOs done right will help your organization drive your change initiatives and your projects forward in a predictable way. It will allow your leadership, your stakeholders, and as well as all of the folks working on the projects work a little bit more harmoniously. There's transparency, and I think that word predictability is key, right? Doesn't mean everything's going to go well, doesn't mean you're going to overcome every problem, but it allows people to interact with projects on a more real data-driven basis if done right. It's not an easy thing to do. I think structurally, conceptually, it's fairly straightforward. In practice, not so much. And then, I think we'll dive into some tips and tricks on how to discuss the PMOs with different folks as well. So there's a lot here. So we'll dive right in. So what is a PMO? Project Management Office. We probably should have, explained an acronym. By the way, pet peeve of mine, if you're writing presentations, even if you think everybody knows an acronym, first time you use it, please explain the acronym, and then you feel free to use the acronym. I just broke my own rule by not explaining what a PMO was. It's an acronym for Project Management Office. Yeah, that's right. You can...
I'm ashamed, Jim. I'm ashamed.
I think similar to what we talked about in prior pods, we're going to talk about structural stuff, and Braden and I will go back and forth on this, but I mean, really a PMO, and we'll get into the kinds of PMOs, but generally speaking, they provide a structure for how projects get managed. Sometimes it goes upstream to managing portfolio, the elements of a portfolio, but project portfolio manager, or PPM, is usually a separate practice. In some organizations, however, they do combine those functions. But essentially, a PMO, for the most part, has the responsibility of either facilitating or administratively overseeing a set of project work or investments that an organization makes. A PMO can be at an enterprise level. It can be within, say, an IT group only. It's basically a project management office to manage a set of work, which is usually multiple projects, in a consistent, repeatable way. And, typically with that, you're going to get the functions of, what methodologies do we want to use to run these projects? How do we want to manage the finances and budget? What are our standard management processes? Change management, risk management, issue management, communications management, quality management. Usually that group is responsible for setting up those standards, setting up repeatable processes and whatnot. Building on that, they're, as PMOs grow and mature, they also look at tools for helping to manage that. Project management tools, schedule management, collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams or Jira or, Microsoft ADO for agile stuff, things like that, and whatnot. And I would say that the other key component with this is what types of functions fall under the PMO. Now, again, that varies by organization. So minimally, I would say project manager, or I say minimally program management. Project management, usually the project management function, there's either a straight line or a dotted line with those resources into that organization. So there's consistency with execution. But PMOs, a lot of them I deal with, also fold in business analysis practices, things with requirements management, process development, things like that. It can include quality assurance, at least from a project perspective. Solution architecture sometimes goes in there, especially when you're dealing with a lot of complex projects. Technical design pieces. So there's different functions depending on how the organization is structured. Any of those things I think are fine. Concepts are the same, right? You want to have a consistent set of processes. Ideally, have some tools to back it up and whatnot. But really, I think where the magic happens is how you implement those for your organization. And Braden's going to get into some of the communication elements, but communications and having the PMO be that hub for communications is critical. So
let me talk just a little bit, if I could, about
communications.
Something that I'm passionate, which is communications. The PMO in the end should be able to enunciate status, resources, schedule, the typical things that you would expect within a given project. The PMO should have control and clear pathways for that communication. They should have standards around how that information gets communicated out. And the standards, again, can involve tools and templates and other things that Jim talked about. But in the end, and this is what's important, if those templates and tools get ignored, which often they do, or if they get populated in ways that are starting to become less useful, in the end, you have to go back to the principle of, am I accomplishing the goal that I have for this PMO? Am I coordinating and ensuring that the delivery of this is a consistent experience? And if I'm not, then something needs to change, whether that's the way that I'm communicating, not necessarily, again, the template or the tool, which people always jump to, but is it the way that I'm populating the information? Is it the way that the information is being shared? What are the cadences that I have that I'm informing stakeholders? Are those cadences effective? Are they attending? Are they listening? Are they engaged in the conversation? If not, do I need to change the way that I'm sharing that information? These are questions that PMOs should frequently be asking and prodding to say, how engaged am I getting my stakeholders through the communication paths that I'm using? Jim, any thoughts on any of this as we've been going through?
Yeah. I think if they
yeah.
don't, I am such a good communicator that if my message isn't getting through, I pretty much just blame the stakeholders. I mean,
because your communication's that good.
It's so good.
I will say one other thing too. So my example, I think at the beginning was getting these exercises from a PMO, right? That say, hey, give me all this information right now. Don't ask questions about it. It's just a fire drill. And we all get these types of fire drill communications. Can I just advocate that if this comes from a PMO, if you spend 1 minute with an opening couple of sentences sharing context, and I don't mean context like my executive told me I had to do this. That's bad. Don't do that. The context should be something, a great example. Let's say that executive that I referenced earlier came and said, hey, what's the status of this? I don't know what it is, and you wanted to collect that. Hopefully you already should have had it, but let's say you had to collect some more information on it. It would be so easy to, in 2 sentences, say something as simple as, hey, we need to provide a quick status update on a client-facing project in order to update our executives who are new, who are coming up to speed on what the status of these things are. Could you please help me give them the information they need? There, I spent 3 sentences giving someone I would just call it courtesy, common human courtesy of understanding why I'm asking them for something. Yeah. And you'd be astonished at how much more responsive people are when they have context and when you ask in a what I would call is just basically decent way, as opposed to saying, here's a fire drill, this is a 9-part email, start with part what, like everyone hates those emails.
I think another example would be, please fill this information out. It's really needed. The organization is about to go through a set of layoffs, so we want to see which set of projects are functioning and managed well and which aren't. So, and believe it or not, that tends to get people to respond with a lot of information. So,
I don't advocate for that way, I'll just say. But Jim, maybe that's been effective. Do you want to talk? Yeah. Do you want to talk to us about the PMO types?
No, I want to do one other paradoxical talk about a paradoxical experience I've had, and it's interesting when you get good at communicating, you're going to find that a lot of your peers may not be as good. So the interesting thing about really building that relationship with your stakeholders is over time you're going to end up building a trusting relationship. They're going to entrust you implicitly. Your life will become easier. They'll just trust that you're going to get the work done, and if you need something, it's justified, right? So these are all good things. Ironically, when you start to manage larger initiatives which have larger budgets, you're going to have different executive stakeholders and different things. and what I found really fascinating as I progress through my career is when you get to the point you're good at this communication and you're good at picking the information out to escalate up to the executive leadership so that they can either be aware of something or interact. The irony of it is they're going to be able to interact with the information you provided. So it's this weird thing that typically when information goes up on a program or project, it's such nonsense and gobbledygook that's thrown on a slide that's a templated slide and it says status yellow, something's not going right. It doesn't, like, people, the executives can't do anything with it. They're like, blah, tell me what you need. Whereas if it's done right, they're going to be like, why is, bullet 3 on slide 3 red, and you explain this, but why, they'll be able to ask much more contextual questions, which has the weird effect of feeling like you're being grilled, which is true, but it's because you're being transparent. So it's this paradox where I come out of a meeting and my project's actually like fully like transparent and on track, but I feel like I just got taken out to the woodshed, and this other project, which is 3 years behind and 50 million over budget, it's just, they couldn't make heads or tails of it. So it's a little bit of a paradox with some of this, but I think it's a good thing.
And Jim, I will say in defense of that, because I could see people then saying, well, great, what I heard Jim just tell me is that I just need to obscure my updates in terrible, awful technical language or poorly authored risks and issues, and people won't understand it, they won't ask questions, and great, I'm off. The fact is that Jim's right in that you definitely, because if you're very effective at communicating and transparent, you are going to be more frequently the focus of attention, the star of the show at updates where you get peppered with questions. Now usually being I know experienced the way Jim is as well, he's not going in there saying, hey, I have all these problems. He's also saying, here's the solutions that we're using to mitigate. Here's the resources that we have involved. And typically, if you come with the problems as well as the solutions that you're approaching with, which, I mean, that's PM 101. Yeah. Never go in with a problem that you don't already have a plan for. You might need to say, hey, I need your support to get these resources. But go in with a plan, right? But so you might be the focus of attention for maybe more frequently than others. But when the others obscure, and then they can't obscure anymore, then all of a sudden there's much uglier conversations. And those uglier conversations aren't, hey, well, what are you doing about this? Or are you sure that plan is right? It's, why didn't you tell me this 6 months ago? And that's a much uglier conversation, in my experience, than these smaller conversations that are happening more frequently. I think as a PMO leader, a leader in a PMO, either a program manager or project manager, I don't know that we spend enough time looking at those updates, the things that go in the tools. We spend too much time looking at the tools and the templates, and not enough time looking at how those templates are populated and working individually with the people who are populating them to say, let me coach you and guide you on a better, more effective way to communicate that information. You said job 309 is, in D status.
Yeah, that's, no one understands. You know what I'm really good at? Like patience and coaching for people. Yeah, I know everybody who's worked for me.
So Jim can hire someone to help him do that. But if you think about it, right? Coaching the people who are filling those templates, and you can start hierarchically, right? So if you have a program manager who's responsible for project managers who are populating that information, and to say, hey, start with your program managers hierarchically and say, hey guys, let me share with you the type of update or communication that's acceptable, right? And the proxy that I usually use is, my mother should be able to understand this. Maybe not all of the details of the technology behind it, but the words that I'm using to communicate, I should be able to share with my mother, and she could get the gist of it. And then I could feel, and she might say, hey, where are the details?
There's no excuse not to be able to do this at this point. I mean, look, Braden's way infinitely more patient than I am, which is, why we work well together. But like if I have to explain to you for a third time, like when you're writing a risk is not an issue. A risk is there's some probability of some event happening in the future that's going to have some impact of some severity, right? Structurally, like back to grade school, like blah, blah, blah. Like I mean, if I have to tell you 3 times like how to write a risk, I'm going to lose it. And then I'll just say a status. Like again, stoplight statuses are pretty much the consistent way of communicating broad. Like and we've invented some amber color that's in the middle of yellow and red because whatever. But that like you can literally go to ChatGPT and say, I need to write a status update that gives, and here's the color. And even ChatGPT will say, you need to give the reasons why it's not green and then what you're going to do to get it back to green, right? Like these are basics, but a PMO, fundamentally needs to reinforce this. And Braden's right. You got to coach it and whatnot, but.
Well, and just say, I mean, go ahead, and we will. I think we actually do need to probably sometimes say we are going to coach people on. Here's the appropriate way to write. We're going to write risks. Yeah. We're going to write issues.
And we can pick real world examples.
But the point being that I think as a PMO, as a leader in the PMO, whether you're the overall leader of the PMO, whether you're a program manager, I think your time would be well spent if you want to have that transparency that Jim was referencing earlier. You really need to spend time coaching. And if you do it hierarchically, meaning if you start with the leadership and say, now I want you to go work with your folks, your project managers, but giving them examples and saying, let's write together, 2 or 3 statuses. We're going to do it together. Here's what it looks like. Now I want you to go make sure that your folks are doing the same. And by the way, your performance objectives for the year are going to be based on how effectively I'm interpreting that, and you'd be surprised at how much better some of that material can get, and then you're more effective.
One of the elements that we want to talk about is how, the deployment structures of a PMO. A PMO, when you think about it, usually is some honking centralized organization, has all the project managers reporting to it. They have, tools like Clarity or, name your honking big project management tool, budgeting and resource forecasting and all of that and everything else. But the truth of the matter is it doesn't have to be that way. I think.
Jim, what is the average size of honking, just so that I can quantify?
Honking,
yeah.
Honking from a users or honking from like a net expenditure? Like
dollars, I would say. What's honking dollars? Like, I've got a honking set of dollars here.
I mean, I've seen organizations spend, $8 million a year on tools, which is insane for project management tools. But we've worked for some huge corporations, but I guess it's not. I mean, if you're like so many organizations worked with had a $500 million like project portfolio every year, right? So, and that's not counting their operational projects and everything. So, but but a lot of times when these things get rolled out, they're masks. People use them as masks to deflect from the fact that they don't know how to functionally build something within a complex organization. So I'd say when you're talking about PMO types, that it's super important to know that there's not one particular type. So Braden and I've started several, Braden started and been part of several. You have your traditional centralized where it's just what you would think, right? There's flavors of it, but it's a centralized organization, centralized processes, consistent tooling, everything else. Typically, the PMs report into that organization. If you have other functions, those functional folks report into it. It's kind of a big centralized mass, right? But there's other organizational structures where you heard the word federated earlier. You have the title of this episode, right? There's federation of functions sometimes, right? So sometimes portions of what the PMO does can be federated out to different portions of the organization. So maybe the PMs actually don't report in, but they're dotted line into the PMO centralized structure, but they report up through business units or IT units or whatnot. But the benefit of that is they have to follow the consistent structural processes, tools from the PMO, but they're tied in more directly with the day-to-day functioning of the organization. That's more effective for some groups. I think one of the from a maturity standpoint, if you're dealing with an organization who's never had this, and it would be a culture shock to really put in a big centralized group, and or these organizational structures we call centers of excellence, right? And really, it's probably the least you can do to start getting things done consistently. But what you say is like, there's a set of functions we do within an organization from a PMO or a project standpoint. You have a project management center of excellence or a PMO, and you provide a set of resources, a set of collaborations. You can still have people dotted line into that. You can have a business analysis center of excellence. Here's our methodology, here's our templates. We didn't talk about it, but here's our job classes, families, job descriptions. Here's your ladder for how you move up in these functions. But really, there's no one answer, and maybe that's a little scary to some folks because there's not a playbook. But I think this is where we want to get into the next part of the conversation, which is if you're going to roll out a PMO, or if you rolled out a PMO and it's not getting traction, you really got to understand the culture of the organization you're part of, your executive sponsorship, and then how do you right size, even if you have a vision to do things in a certain way, how do you go from your current state, given the culture, and get to the end state where you want to be? Because if you try to disrupt the culture, and this goes for an individual project or a PMO, you're most likely going to fail. So, I don't know, Braden, if, I think, again, organizational size plays into it as well. Like if you have a few projects, a lot different than if you have, like I said, a $500 million annual portfolio of projects, which there's going to be a lot more accountability needed. Any thoughts on structural types?
Yeah, the one of the things as you were talking is just, and for folks who maybe aren't aware, and it seems kind of intuitive, but if you haven't seen back and forth, there's trade-offs between having a centralized organization and a federated organization, and I'd say those are the two most common. I've seen center of excellence less. I've usually seen a full PMO that's either federated or centralized. And the trade-off that you typically get is, in a centralized organization, I truly do have one place where I can go to control methodology, to share best practices, et cetera, as well as to get status. The trade-off there is, if all of my PMs are direct line into a central organization, not dotted line, they don't live in the business units or in the IT units, but they live in a central PM project management organization. What you'll often get is those individuals, those project managers, might work a project in the claims area one year and then move over and work on in a completely different area the next year, and as a result, maybe aren't super knowledgeable or close to the organizations for which they're doing project management. Now, there are plenty of project managers who can learn quickly, who can adapt, or who have been across the organization so many times in the enterprise that they already know the players, they know the people, and they can bounce back and forth, and it's really easy for them because they know lots of people, and experience helps them be effective there. But oftentimes what can happen is, in a centralized organization, the reason I think that decentralization or federation happens is because the individuals that aren't living in the business units and aren't close to those people who are doing the execution work, they're not familiar enough with the processes, the people, the technology, the solutions, etc., to be super effective. And so either they're learning and they're trying to come up to speed, but it takes a while for them to be effective, or worse, they become what Jim and I call checkbox PMs. And a checkbox PM is where you just say, hey, you tell me the tasks that you're working on. I'll write them down in the project plan and what date you think it's going to be done. And then I'll ask you if it's done, right? That individual isn't adding value. They don't understand. If you really want to add value as a PM, as a program manager, etc., you have to understand the underlying business process, technology solution, you have to understand it all at a fairly detailed level. And then you can add value by spotting risks, by understanding and being able to quickly communicate those risks, get the appropriate resources to bear, etc. You add value by being a team member that actually knows what's going on, as opposed to an administrator that's pestering people with questions. And that's the crux in my mind of an effective versus ineffective. So there's a trade-off between having that centralized group, which brings people out of those units, versus federated, where they live in those towers, in those, IT or business areas, but then maybe they have less of a connection with some of the standards that they should be following.
Less accountability, right? Maybe, right. And in order for a PMO to be successful, one of the key elements is you have to have at least one, but ideally all or most of the executives of the organization supporting the effort in some fashion. I mean, they don't have to buy into everything, but they have to at least buy into the concept that a PMO is valuable. If you don't have that, I'm going to be honest with you. You either got to wait that leadership change out, or you should leave, because you're gonna be fighting an uphill battle from getting the right budgets to getting the right staff. We didn't talk about, one of the things we had on here, and we probably won't get to it, but it might be its own episode. How much budget should be set aside for project management overhead or PMO, right? And there's some industry metrics out there. I think, Braden, we were talking about, 10 to 12% of
10% is a really quick, if you needed just a sort of thumb in the air, what is it? 10% overhead is typical industry, yeah. Yeah,
so if you have $100 million worth of projects, it's $10 million budget. But, if you get an executive who doesn't think there's any value in that, and they're like, no, we're going to give you $2 million, you're going to be like, what am I going to do with $2 million to deliver $100 million worth of work, right? So be very cautious and make sure you have executive buy-in and sponsorship, especially when you're rolling out new things, right? That's one of the big ones. If you're an executive who is looking to build out a PMO and find somebody to run it, I would very much caution you not to hire, what's a kind word?
A process wonk.
A process wonk. That was exactly what I was going to say.
We've seen it so many times. I mean, share some. I have stories. You have
almost
stories,
every organization has them, right? And I think, let me be fair. I think there's value for people who are really passionate about the science, the academic elements of project management, right? I think they're a little Pollyanna about, projects. I don't know if you ever reach a point. I'll just be honest. I've been in one organization in my entire life who's essentially functioned smoothly. One, and that was a startup. And that was like, who just kind of, where it just, there was the product team who envisioned products by listening to customers and then translated that into stuff. And then there was a negotiation on capacity. And then it turned into a set of work, and that work was tested. Like one. All the rest have some sort of dysfunction. And, I think you can't put that type of a person in charge of rolling this out, because you have to put someone who's just practical, who's been there, who has scars, who will shudder when you say certain things because a memory will pop in their head, right? I mean, those are the people you want, because they've been through it, and they're not going to do something that's going to repeat those experiences.
Well, I was going to say that there's another important one that going back to kind of what makes a PMO effective or less effective, and it has to do with having enterprise vision, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
There are you can and it's not necessarily, so this isn't necessarily someone who's a process wonk. You could even have someone who has decently good instincts in terms of getting the right people in place, communicating the right things, but doesn't have the enterprise or sort of vision of the enterprise that's necessary in order to help the PMO do what it needs to do. Case in point, let's say, and this goes back to some of the things that Jim was saying about the culture of an organization. your organization, let's say, could be small. It could be very agile in nature, flexible. And if you're trying to focus on standardizing certain things to the nth degree with templates and whatever else. Now we're starting to sound like we hate tools and templates, which isn't true.
No, not true. Yeah.
But misunderstanding the approach in the organization, sometimes you might say, hey, we should standardize this, but let's keep this super light and easy, because I can tell within this small organization, I don't need to go find some huge Fortune 50 company's 2,000 page manual on how to do quality assurance correctly. Maybe as the company grows, I take some of those learning. That's great. But initially, the culture of this company is all about being able to quickly produce and pilot new products that we can get to market within a super short time. I don't want to get in the way of that. And I need to make sure that whatever approach that I'm taking to helping manage those initiatives and make them predictable, as we were talking about earlier, is compatible with the culture. And if it's a nimble, agile, small group, my solution needs to be within that context. If the group is chaotic and it needs molding, if it's a mid-size or a larger organization, they say, hey, we're in complete chaos, we have no predictability, then maybe I say, yeah, you know what, I need to introduce some predictability here with maybe a little deeper or a little more carefully thought out standards and an approach that brings people in. But it's going to depend on the combination of what the vision of that enterprise is, the culture of that enterprise, as well as what Jim was talking about earlier, the sponsorship of the executive leaders who say, here's what I want, and hearing and understanding that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much here, and maybe we can get through these, and we'll see. But I want to build on. So I'll just give a real world example of a PMO. That I've when I've rolled these out, or I've come in to help a couple of organizations fix their PMO rollouts, and it kind of, in the two examples I'm thinking of, they just went too fast. I mean, so let me give you an example, right? So one of the challenges that a lot of organizations face this is they have, let's say there's 10 programs and 50 small projects, right? They are all managing status, and they're all giving, so they have their status reports with their stoplight colors and your risks and your issues, and then there's a section that says upcoming milestones or upcoming tasks, blah blah blah, right? So you have a section for that and accomplishments and whatnot. What was interesting is that information, when it came back, it was in the same format, but like they had wildly different information, different levels, right? So what the PMO tried to do was to bring in a tool with all a shlot of detail, and force everybody to fill that out in hopes of getting it to be consistent. And people, weren't having, and there's a whole slew of reasons culturally, like you're asking them to spend 2 hours a week filling out a form. Like they couldn't get the information. The other part is they couldn't get some of that information because of maturity from the IT group in this particular case. So they're like, what am I supposed to do? And the answer was, well, that's your job. Go figure it out. If you have to sit with them, go sit. It was just unrealistic. So one of the things to consider when you're rolling this out, we talk about, oh God, it's such a consulting term, which, I'm a consultant, but I just don't like the term, but it's kind of a useful way of describing it. It's this crawl, walk, run, right? When you're rolling out a PMO, start by crawling. So one of the first things I tell people is think about what is in defense. Like if a PM can't provide you this basic level of information, they should walk themselves out the door. Start there, right? So if they can't tell you the hyper basics about their project, like the SDLC phases and their target dates, like this is when I'm projecting to finish requirements and development and testing, and this is my target go live. If they can't do that after you've given them weeks to do that, they should not be in that job. So if you go back to the baseline, it makes it an indefensible thing for the organization. Like we have to start here, and then once you establish everybody giving you that baseline, then you can step up to the next level. Consider that incremental rollout.
As always, we welcome everyone's feedback. Really encourage you to share comments, to share your thoughts. You know, part of what we enjoy, I think, both Jim and I, from being part of the PM community, is interaction, is getting thoughts and ideas from other folks as we go through. Is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that we should have thought about? You know, are Jim's ideas really as dumb as they sound? Let us know in the comments. No,
they're not. They're not. They're all great.
And if you're listening to audio only, by the way, we actually do have faces in various places. You can actually get a visual and see our direct interactions. But just remember, you know, our tagline here. Remember, projects are hard.
You just need to be harder. Braden really struggled with this one, so we're going to try out different taglines. I think this one's a winner if Braden can keep a straight face on it.
Braden's not going to be able to keep it. This one's... I mean, well, let's see.
Braden can choose the next one. To be fair, if you couldn't figure it out, this came from my mind. So Braden's got the next one.
I'll have the next one ready, either me or ChatGPT. Okay, so folks, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you guys next time.
Thanks, everybody.